welcome to this first of our policy forums for the Christians for Labour Network for this year. It's something we've done a few times in the past and more leading up to the state election as well. We're wanting to put a focus on our network thinking hard about various policy issues. So today we have got, we're joined by John Engler from Shelter New South Wales, the CEO, Rose Thompson, who's the CEO of the Faith Housing Network, and Alliance, David Barrow, actually. Alliance, I'm sorry. And I've got David Barrow, who is the lead organiser of the Sydney Alliance. And it's worth noting that we are Christians for Labour and this is a Labour network, but that's not a statement of the three who are presenting to us, who are Christians, but work bipartisanly in their field and their fields of specialty. So they're here to let us know what's going on and give us their understanding and their perception, both from as experts in the field and as Christians as to what's going on in the housing situation. So a big welcome to the three of you. And David, I was going to hand it over to you if you wanted to start.
Yeah, thank you. Kia ora, everyone. And I want to acknowledge that I'm calling in on Gadigal and Wangal land here in Ashfield. So I'm going to interview John and then I'm going to interview Rose. And I'm going to do that because the three of us are great extroverts. Between us, we could talk talk away to the end of Earth. I'm also very good at interrupting. So I'll be using both of those tools to seek to get as much information out of John and Rose in the first 20 minutes so that we can get clear on the facts. And then we're going to move into some political analysis. So that's what we've got planned for this evening. And after we've done our first little presentations, we're then going to open up to question Q&A where we can have a discussion.
Just wait.
All right, so John, we're going to start with you. Okay, so John, actually, what we might do is at the beginning, each of us might introduce ourselves as Christians. So I am a member of Leichhardt Uniting Church. I grew up in the Anglican Church. For me, being an organizer is my calling. I feel like it's my vocation, and it's something that's very important to me, that I live out my faith through the work that I do. I feel very blessed to work with many Christians and other people of other faiths and other people of goodwill who have no faith in my work in the Sydney Alliance. And I really draw on the prophetic gospel to do that work. When I think about housing for myself, it's something that is concrete. It brings people together. And it's a way that we can bring all of these diverse people in our society together on a common ground. John, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, and again, I apologise to everyone. Good evening, everyone. Mike, various people, really pleased to be part of this great group tonight. Just a very quick introduction. I work at Shelter New South Wales. We're very concerned about lack of not just affordable, but secure housing for everyone. Housing security is fundamental, and it's certainly been fundamental in my life and my belief from growing up in a house that was my grandmother's, being the youngest of 9, my personal, my professional, my political beliefs about how fundamental housing is hasn't left me. So I come to you tonight with that. I identify as being Catholic when that census form comes around. Very much I've enjoyed working alongside, whether it's St Vincent de Paul as a lay organisation or actual formal religious organisations that I've worked for previously. But a bit of a theme always, culminating in my role at Shelter New South Wales, is ensuring that people, particularly for those for whom the market falls short or fails, are provided with secure accommodation.
Thanks, John. And Rose?
Well, hi, everybody. I was raised Anglican. I've worked across a Catholic university and Anglican schools, and I've got 2 sons who go to Hillsong, and I can sometimes be found beside them on the pews there. So at the end of the day, which is like one spectrum to the other, at the end of the day, I have a fundamental belief that your relationship with this is with God, and you should be able to express that on any pew and then live it out Monday to Saturday, because it's not really about church to me, but relationship with God. And I hope that when people interact with me, they get some sense of that. And I do my best in that space. I have moved out of the higher education sector to do this role, primarily because of my concern about the increasing numbers, the increasing insensitivity. There's lots of talk, there's lots of eyes on what's happening, but not so much action. And I think there's so much that could be done so speedily. And I feel that the church and the faith sector in particular, and when I say church in that context, I'm speaking about all faiths, they've done it for years, they've done it for centuries, sometimes not so well, but I think going forward, they can take a leadership role in what happens.
Thanks, Rose. All right, so John, you're up. Can you explain the difference between social, public, and affordable housing, plus what's specialist and transitory housing, and can you do it in 90 seconds?
I can indeed. So, social housing is where people on very low incomes, usually a statutory income, we say, pay no more than 30%. It's the old-fashioned housing commission, if you like. That's social or public housing. Affordable housing, different metric aimed at low-paid workers who are essential. So generally, they're typified by paying 75% of the market rent. A third category, specialist housing, is for anyone else for whom it's not just the affordability, some other mechanism, some support, some service to make sure that that housing stays on foot is needed beyond the affordability. So we call that special or supported housing. That's needed as well. So there's three areas: public housing, affordable housing for renters, and specialist housing that supports people who've got a need beyond just affordability.
Thanks, John. Now, John, your mic is a little bit, my voice is scratchy, but I think it's your mic is scratchy. So if there's anything you can do about that, good. If not, we'll go to the next question. So, John, before we get into the state government delivery of housing, let's talk about the conversation with the feds. So what is this $10 billion fund that the now Labor government has been talking about? What's that all about?
So again, and if I miss this, I'll put a link into the chat room for everyone. So that's the Housing Australia Future Fund. What's good about that $10 billion, it's for social housing, so that first category we talked about, and it's aimed specifically at creating a fund, like a sovereign wealth fund, that over time produces an income, and that income then gets used to provide the affordable housing continuum. The good thing about that is targeted 20,000 of those properties, which would be delivered over a 10-year period, would be for social housing. But what's good about the targeting of it, they are targeting particular cohorts who've traditionally or currently missing out. So that's 4,000 properties for people on, 20,000 properties for women and children fleeing domestic violence and or older women at risk of homelessness. About 200 million towards the repair of existing public housing. So one of the issues that we struggle with is the suitability of existing public housing often falls into disrepair. We need a contribution from the federal government, which they've committed to maintain existing public housing. $30 million to build more specialist, as we talked about, homelessness services or people at risk of experiencing homelessness, as well as, I think there's another commitment in there, 10,000 properties which will be straight up affordable housing. And happy to talk about that more, but by affordable housing, it's a confusing concept, not just housing that's affordable, but housing for key workers. These are the cleaners, the checkout operators and the carers who kept us fed, safe and water during COVID. The Commonwealth scheme recognises that this group of long-term renters needs assistance.
Thanks, John. So while we stay at the federal level, I think it's important to be very clear with everyone that there are many schemes that the state government can take initiative with in terms of delivering affordable and social housing. But the fundamental framework at the federal level for tax concessions and negative gearing is one of the key reasons that we're in the situation. And there's not one housing expert anywhere in Australia that will tell you different. That is the fundamental problem in the system. The political reality is that was taken to the people of Australia in 2019 and it was rejected. And that means that it is highly unlikely that the Labor government in Canberra will move on those tax settings when it comes to the family home. There is an argument, and I think it is a worthy argument, but one we won't need to get into today, that the housing investment that people have is essentially a pension fund, essentially a way for people to retire. There's a whole argument around that. We don't have time to get into that. So we're going to go now so that's at the federal level. let's talk state. We're leading up to a state election. John, there was an announcement made about this thing called shared equity. First of all, what is shared equity and why is it good news that everyone's talking about it?
So shared equity recognises, and what's interesting about David is that the statement around shared equity that was released by, in this case, the New South Wales government most recently in its budget response, is that in some ways mirrors exactly what the federal scheme otherwise is. It's where there's an acknowledgement that in order for people to own the property long term, the equity that's required is beyond most people. So government says, well, we can take a share in the equity. In this case, it varies between brand new and existing properties, so 30% for existing, 40% for brand new. And government says, we'll take a share of the equity. So you don't have to service the debt on that 30 or 40% respectively. They also have similar schemes that allow low deposit loans. So often people find it difficult to amass the mortgage. So they might be able to service a mortgage debt, but they have difficulty amassing the deposit. So there's two elements of how the state government is committed to saying, well, what we could do is just to take a share of the equity of the property. So that's where, again, you're not paying the debt on 100%, you're not servicing a mortgage on 100%, more like 60% or 70%. There's a shared equity scheme. And what government's committed to doing is saying that any capital uplift that you would otherwise get from that's then returned, mainly, however, felt by the felt by the actual applicant, the family themselves, that they have that ability to be able to also leverage and enjoy the capital uplift of such property.
Thanks, John. So if you think about the spectrum of housing, you starting with public, I'm going to go through all of the problems, right? Okay. So starting with homelessness, which is really at the tail end of the problem, that's what you see. And often you actually don't see. The majority of homeless people you do not see because they're women and kids and families, and they're couch surfing rather than chronic homeless. You then have not enough beds for transition and emergency housing. So that's for people who are escaping domestic and family violence and other untenable situations. You then have affordable housing, which is people who can pay a rent, and there's not enough of that either. That is people, who are working. And then you have social housing. And in the social housing, that is public housing, it's being run down. So the way they do not build very rarely do they build new housing out of the state coffers. In fact, the current policy of the New South Wales government, in fact, it's probably a treasury policy rather than a government policy in terms of politics, is that they will sell assets in order to maintain the remaining assets. So what you've got is that every year you've got a decline in the overall number of public housing in the context of a growing population. Okay, so that's kind of the overall picture, and that's why people have been exercised about these housing issues for, well over 20 years. So, John, that's the affordability question, but actually at this election, the big question and the one that's in play is about security of housing. Do you want to speak about that issue? Because that's something that people could really get their hands on. It could be something that we could see shifted in the next 3 years.
Yeah, it's a good point, David. And it's funny because we often think about affordable housing. Sometimes affordable housing is affordable because it doesn't have good amenity or it's not very secure. So we think that people are deserving of secure accommodation. So at Shelter, for example, our mandate is exactly that, a fairer housing system for more secure housing for all. So just to answer, I think it might have been Mike's question a bit earlier. One of the things around how you might say, well, will that, just to answer that, if the shared equity scheme is aimed at providing stock that wouldn't otherwise exist, it shouldn't increase unaffordability. If it's brand new stock that wouldn't otherwise exist but for that scheme, it's adding to the pie. There's more properties around. So not necessarily less of an argument for existing properties, but generally, if we target new properties, that's a much better way of making sure that prices don't necessarily escalate. But on the issue that David's mentioned, what we've seen, just very quickly, that the census has revealed for us, and data out even outside of census most recently says more and more people are renting, more and more people are holding a mortgage, but for a longer period, unless people are owning properties outright. So irrespective of the very overt homelessness end of the room, we talk about a housing continuum that David's talked about. Even the three areas that roughly occupy a third each, a lot more people are renting, used to be below 25%, edging up towards 30%. A lot more people having mortgages they don't pay out. So they might have a mortgage for a period. Effectively, they're renting from the bank. So as David's alluded to, they might retire at 67, but they still have a big balloon payment, if you like, that they've got to pay off the property. And therein lies the conundrum about security, not just affordability. They might have paid off a lot of the debt, but they've then got to be able to go and buy another property to live in. And less people own their properties outright. We used to have about 2/3 of people in this country that either owned or fully they had a mortgage or fully paid off their property. Those figures are getting less and less. So we're faced with a whole group of people for whom it's bad enough that there's more and more people renting, paying a lot of their low incomes in rent, but they're not given a rental system which provides security. So just to finish, in this country, in this state in particular, people's tendencies for rental, for the vast majority of renters, is measured in months, not years. It's less in units than it is in houses. And increasingly, families with children are renting longer, renting units, and that might be their tenure for the rest of their life. They will rent for the rest of their life. There's an opportunity for here for policy and policy responses and election arguing to be aimed at not just affordability, but security. It's a more nuanced thing, but that's what people want across the whole housing system, housing security, not just.
Thanks, John. Removing no grounds eviction is a very simple way for the state government to do that. It is a stroke of a pen. There is a political, question that needs to happen. Labor has committed to it. The Liberal Party has not committed to it. Although it is very interesting that the story goes that when it came to cabinet, it split down generational lines rather than factional lines. The older people opposed it and the younger millennials supported removing no grounds eviction. Removing no grounds eviction would overnight create a huge number of secure dwellings for a large number of people. Just so that people understand what no grounds is, any reason that you would have to remove someone from a house is grounds. No grounds eviction, removing no grounds eviction is when the landlord has no grounds and they just say, you're out, right? So every other state has, you have to have grounds to ask your tenant to leave, but New South Wales does not. So we're lagging behind there. I'm now going to go to Rose, pardon me. And Rose, can you tell us, the two questions I asked Rose to speak on was, one, what are the barriers that churches have to building affordable housing on their properties? And second, what are the challenges that individual congregations might have internally inside their denominations about doing this? So I'm going to hand over to Rose now, and then we'll get into some of the questions, Mark.
Look, I'd just like to put a little context first when you're wondering about the Faith Housing Alliance. We're a peak body under government funding, and our membership association, whose members range from Anglicare, Baptist Care, Catholic Care, through to Muslim Care, Vinnie's, Wesley Mission, Uniting, and so on. So we are working with them to deliver housing. So the barriers to housing that churches face in the political setting is that some, some belts of the electorate are very opposed to social and affordable housing going into their areas. I don't need to tell you which electorates those might be. But that is actually a problem, I think, that we all face, but the churches also, because they're established places of worship and land assets, many of them are located in these traditional belts, if you like. And then in the political setting, I think that the churches are facing the issue of, we've got the Marrickville site that's a favourite of John's, but wherever there's local government issues that are coming up as roadblocks, and when it crosses over into the complexity of a couple of things like heritage listed buildings, there's a difference in the political structures of all the local councils, and this is really David's expertise, because some of the local councils have housing plans and many don't. And the only way that's going to change is when organizations like community organizers of David's organizations and the churches and such come and actually advocate for change in that area. So I think really a key barrier in the political setting is that my observation, and I prefaced with the fact I've only been in this role this year, so I don't pretend to have the depth of knowledge that John and David have. But my observation is this, that with the lack of a national affordable housing plan, a national housing plan, what we've got at the moment is a bit of to and fro between federal and state. And so where they don't want to step into something, you'll hear resoundingly the comment, oh, I believe that's a state issue. And I believe Albo actually said that on to the media the other day. And conversely, you get the state government saying, well, that's a federal issue. And so until there's a national plan, in my view, and there's lots of research about this, if you want to follow Professor Matthew Desmond in particular at Princeton University, there's lots of research about unless there is a national plan, it won't work. The other thing that I'm really concerned about, which is probably not church specific, is this response to populist electorate issues. So, for example, huge amounts of funding to domestic violence, that is absolutely fine. It was absolutely needed. But my concern is when it's not, we can't just have rapid response stuff. We actually need to have a long-term sustainable plan working across the levels of government. Otherwise, we will not achieve what we need to achieve. So these are the concerns that the churches are discussing and the CEOs of the faith-based organizations that I'm working with in the political context. Now, you and your church, what can you do and why isn't it happening? Well, part of it is the complexity around land ownership and who can actually make the decision. So good intended people sitting in the local parish, the local synagogue, the local wherever, can come up with a great idea, but they can't make the decision. And oftentimes to actually plot the line of where the decision making resides is one of the biggest barriers to progress in the church in terms of making measurable gains in housing support. The other thing is inconsistent purpose, I believe. So you've got some that have got the social justice cause sitting alive and well around the board tables of some churches and then higher up in the decision-making bodies. And you've got some that are seeking commercial return. They don't mind engaging in it, but they want to see a good return for whatever reason. And the problem with that is that affordable housing does not bring commercial returns at the rate you would normally see in commercial developments. It's running probably about 6%. It may have even dropped now, John, do you think, with some of the issues since the pandemic with building and what have you?
2 minutes left.
Sorry?
2 minutes left. Thanks, Rose.
Oh, okay. And so I think there's also the aspect the church in many ways has forgotten their purpose, and there's the danger of complacency that dims the responsibility to act. And I think if the church does nothing else, it can move into the intervention space. Many churches do, street-based help. We haven't talked about homelessness tonight, but there's a new group of homeless. It's not just street people, it's people that are now subject to these evictions and the changing rates of rental affordability, and they're suddenly finding themselves homeless. So churches can do a lot in that intervention space, but they really need to get a vision for moving to recovery space and then prevention space. And if you need any help with that, we can certainly talk to you, but my 2 minutes is up, I'm sure.
Thanks, Rose. So I'm going to finish and then we're going to throw over to questions. So the question that I think is on a lot of people's mind is, what can I do as a church member and what can I do as a Labor member that will have the most effect? So the first thing I would say that I'm going to tell you a story from this afternoon. This afternoon, I was on a meeting with the Hornsby Sydney Alliance Local that's made up mainly of Baptist churches in that area, as well as a Uniting and a Catholic church. And they got a commitment of 474 affordable homes built into the Hornsby Town Centre. Now, that hasn't happened yet. It's going out to public consultation. So they're getting organised and making sure that the public don't say, no, we don't want height. They're getting out there and to get people to say, actually, we want these affordable homes. That commitment, there is no other housing advocates in Hornsby, let me tell you. That came from those churches working in a unified, organised way over a period of 12 months and taking this call to the commons seriously, that we aren't just the holy huddle. I mean, I don't need to tell you, you're all active in politics, but taking church out into the community. So that is a remarkable achievement in a council where Philip Ruddock is the mayor, which has a Liberal Party majority, right? So these are not people who are, out there bashing down the door of Shelter, New South Wales to build affordable housing. Power concedes nothing without demand. And part of the call of church people is to speak truth to power and to organise effectively. The second thing is that as a member of the Labor Party, there is absolutely a role that you have inside the Labor Party to continue to agitate on the issue of housing, particularly at the local council level. It cannot be assumed that because someone is from the Labor Party that they will automatically take a favourable position towards affordable and social housing. It's not that people will oppose it, but what you will see at the state level, for example, is you'll see a government that says we've inherited a huge debt from the previous government. We cannot afford to do public and affordable housing. Under the last set of Labor premiers, the housing issue got worse and worse. Under Carr, under Yemma, under Nathan Rees, and under Christina Keeling. Yes, they did better than I will say that, hand on heart, they did better than the last period of New South Wales government. And I've said that to the New South Wales government, so I don't mind if they hear it. But still, the issue is there. And part of that issue is deeply, deeply lodged inside Treasury and how Treasury does return on investment. So they see that housing is a cost rather than we're taking a broader view of the economy, that when you house someone, the return on investment is huge because all these other services and costs aren't connected. So the real place where you can apply pressure as a church is through the planning system, getting affordable housing built into new developments that are built in your local area. And for more on that, I invite you to come and be part of what we're doing in the Sydney Alliance. It's great fun. So I'm going to finish there and then hand over to Mike to field questions. The aim of today has just been to give a broad overview of some of the landscape and to go deeper from here. Thanks, Mike.
We are going to go to questions, and when we do go to questions, we'll stop the recording so that we can talk a little bit more freely. But before we do go to questions, I wanted to ask David, can you just tell us a little bit more out of the three organisations? I think as individuals, Sydney Alliance is the one that's most easy for us to get involved with, and with your local networks, local alliance networks. Tell us a little bit more about that. How does that work? And how do we get involved in that?
Great question. So we are non-partisan. So if you come and be part in the Alliance, just like the Libs and the Greens that come and be part, you'll have to leave your party affiliation at the door, but you come as a representative of your church. We provide training in all of the public arts of community organising, which is relational meetings, listening, discernment, action, power analysis, and evaluation. And we bring you together with a big group of other folks. Ian's been involved in Sutherland, so has Sue, so they can tell you a bit about it. We get you together with other people in the local community from different walks of life, and then you actually make a decision about what you want to act on. And most of the local teams have decided that housing is the thing that they wanted to fix and tackle. So the easiest way to do that is to get in contact with me, and I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, well, I will turn off the video now. Thanks for watching, and we will move on to questions.